Welcome to Mystical Motherhood Podcast. Today's guest is Heather Grzych. She is the author of the Ayurvedic Guide to Fertility, a new book being released just this week. She's a board-certified Ayurvedic practitioner. She bridges the worlds of conventional and alternative medicine to help women and men heal their physical and emotional lives. She's also the board of directors for the National Ayurvedic Medical Association and has consulted with all kinds of people, including doctors and governments and insurance companies. She takes private consultations and lives within the San Francisco Bay Area. And we had an amazing conversation. I have to tell you guys that we had a beautiful interlock speaking about spirituality, how to apply Ayurvedic practices and yogic practices to your life, and how to really handle what's going on right now and the pressure of these times. We talk about coincidences and synchronicities and spirit working to help us all out. I really hope you enjoy this podcast. Please go buy Heather's book. It's available on Amazon and I believe Barnes & Noble, and it's called The Ayurvedic Guide to Fertility. If you want more information on my work, please go to www.mysticalmotherhood.com. You can reach out to me if you need a private consultation or you're interested in either of my books, Mystical Motherhood and Fertile. They're both available through the website and through Amazon, printed under Pritam Atma. If you liked this podcast, please subscribe, share it with your friends, leave a rating. It really, really helps us. If you want to reach Heather, please read the notes. She is so deep, so profound, so intentional, and so connected. And she creates a very, very calm energy that is really, really, really apparent through this podcast. I hope you enjoy and get a lot of wonderful information today to help you through these really challenging times on the planet.
Hi, I'm Heather Grzych, and I'm an Ayurvedic practitioner. I'm the author of the Ayurvedic Guide to Fertility, and I'm very excited to be here today and talk about my book and whatever else Pritam wants to talk about today.
Awesome. So welcome. I read your book. It's amazing. It has a lot of an amazing content in it. But I specifically want to get into what women, my listeners, are typically mothers or women that are in the process of awakening. And so they're maybe are going through transformation and when they find my work, or ready to take different steps in their lives to feel better. And I want to know, first off, in your book, you talk about the physiological assessments we can do to really assess our health. I would love you to go into that so we can look at how do we start with Ayurveda? You know, if I were going to use Ayurvedic medicine in my life, how do I do a first assessment? And then how would I prepare for pregnancy with it? Like a few things. I know that's a really broad topic, but
yeah. I mean, Ayurveda it's definitely a very tangible art and science. You know, it's not quite like energy medicine. It's not quite as woo. It's a little more in the physical realm, but it connects to the woo, obviously. And very simple things. When we started Ayurveda school, we were all required to take logs and journals of what we ate every day, when we pooped, what it looked like, when we peed, what it looked like, what was going on with our periods, what it looked like, what it felt like, what it smelled, everything. Taking a very detailed inventory of everything that comes in you and everything that comes out of you, right? So your food comes into you, your sensory inputs come into you, light, sound, whatever aromatherapy products you're using, like everything's coming into you, and then things come out of you. So information comes into you. You might speak something about it later, or the digestive tract, shows you later when you poop something out, what it's doing to you. So your body gives you all of this really great data to say, well, is this person healthy? And I think what's tricky about Ayurveda, and I'll explain it in very brief, like sort of high level for people who aren't familiar with it, is that it's based on the premise that when you're in line with your initial nature, then you're going to be your healthiest. So what that means when you know you're in line with your initial nature is when your body is functioning properly. And the way that you look for proper functioning is through the humors in your body, the physical tissues themselves, how they're forming, the how things are digesting, obviously how you feel physically, even your emotions, like when you cry and your brain says, don't cry, it's not okay for you to cry right here in front of these people, or be a big girl, put your big girl pants on, or whatever it is, and then you don't cry and that wet stuff doesn't come out of your eyes and it gets stuck right here. That's something real that's happening to you.
Oh, like when you feel it in your neck and you're kind of regurgitating the emotion. That's interesting.
Yeah. So, a lot of even like thyroid issues with people, there's this like holding thing in the throat that happens. And so what gets trapped, the fluid gets trapped there, because when you cry, it's fluids that are moving, it's energy, it's blood, all these things are shifting physiologically, physically in your body. Even though you feel the emotion of it, you feel the energy of it and all these things, there's an actual mechanism taking place. And if your brain, your thoughts come in and say no, and because of your conditioning, don't do that, that's a natural urge. Once the urge to cry comes up, that's a natural urge to let it pass. You don't want to trap it. If you trap it, it'll hurt you. In the same way that if you get angry, and you feel that rage inside, and you have nowhere to express it, whether, screaming or whatever. If you scream the angry energy, you might end up with a sore throat. I've had that happen. But, you have to let the energy pass, which is why it's great to have a creative passion in your life to be able to do that. So if you notice that things are out of balance, like how can you tell? Well, if your skin is dry, that's an example of one type of imbalance in Ayurveda. That would be an example of a Vata imbalance. So your skin is going to get dry when you're in the dry season, when you're in a winter season where you're in lots of heat indoors and then it's cold outside and maybe snowy and things like that. So Vata is an energy of movement. And when there's too much movement, then it destroys things. So Vata literally means that which moves. So when it moves things, it's great. We want to be moved. We want energy. We want, right? But it has to be in the appropriate amounts, because if it's not in the appropriate amounts, it's going to hurt our body, even if it's all contextual, right? That Vata energy. So that's the air and the space elements. And then another example would be when you have an inflammation process going on. Any inflammatory response in your body, whether it's an autoimmune condition, whether you've got a fever, or anything that's sort of affiliated with inflammation, is a type of humoral imbalance that we refer to as a pitta imbalance in Ayurveda. And you could group a whole bunch of things under that. And pitta means that which cooks. So it's the humor of the body that will literally cook your tissues, kind of like you can make ceviche with lemon or lime or one of those citrus fruits, right? Will cook your tissues. And that's an example. Like, say you eat a lot of citrus, lemon, or lime, you might end up getting higher pitta and cooking your body and ending up with a lot of red skin issues or ridiculously heavy periods, or however your sort of blood building manifests in your body based on your unique ways that you live your life and the environment around you. The third kind of category of imbalances are growth oriented. So they're overgrowths and excess lubrication. So it's the water and the earth elements. And so you might see someone who's got really mucusy, tons and spring allergies. The body isn't just reacting, it's throwing so much mucus at it to protect those tissues that you just have boogers everywhere, and or women who have a lot of cervical mucus all the time, where they can't even necessarily even tell when they're ovulating because their bodies are more wet.
Right.
And then also that will a kapha imbalance would manifest in something like a tumor. Now, a tumor, cancer, for example, is maybe a later stage disease process, but an earlier stage of a disease process on that axis would be like excess heaviness, earthiness, clogging, feeling of being clogged up, foggy. Because when you feel that way, there's a micro effect happening physically in your body. When you feel foggy, you probably are foggy in your body.
That's fascinating, because I was just thinking about, so we're in this, COVID time and we're all at home, and there's days that I'm like, I'm perfect, I'm amazing, but even doing a practice every day and like very, yoga and everything I can possibly think of, there's some days I feel like I may be getting sick. I'm also in New York, I'm in Brooklyn, I'm in the middle of this intensity. Like, it's very intense here with masks, very hard to get out. Everything's completely shut down at all levels. And so then there's some days I feel those kind of symptoms. So I may feel like I could do everything and my brain is just foggy, right? Or I may feel that my throat is getting sick, right? And I'm like, am I getting sick? Am I getting it, right? Or my menstrual cycle, and I've heard other women recently, has been very different. And for example, I did a lot of healing work last week, and I started a week early. I started on day 21. I'm always on day 28, always.
Yeah.
And so I was worried about that. And it was scanty, and then it was long, and then heavy and random. And so when that kind of things happen, because this level of stress, how can we handle that? Because it's happening to a lot of women, I think.
Yeah, it's stress, and it's also disrupted pattern. So it makes complete sense that when you have a disrupted pattern in your life, that your menstrual cycle is going to get disrupted. I don't know why it happens, but whenever a woman comes to me with a period that is irregular in my practice, she's gone through a move, she broke up with a boyfriend, she switched her job. There's some big change that's happened to her. I always discover that when someone has had that. So we are all going through this huge transition right now. And all those people that have those period tracking apps are probably going to be finding some very interesting data.
Yeah, mine was super interesting data. So what do we do? What do we do when, because like, for example, I'm not the only one, because everyone's talking about this, so I have much more pain this month. I had, it was kind of scanty and spotty, and then it was thicker. And I typically don't have a cycle like that. So what can Ayurveda, how can we, and I think it was because I personally did a lot of healing work the week before, and I think I might have shifted it myself beyond what.
Tell me what that entails when you say healing work. What is that?
I did, for me, I do Kundalini yoga, and so I work with healers within the lineage, and some of the high teachers have a really extreme power and energy coming through them, and so we may do some ancient meditations, like up 4 to 16 hours. Minimum daily. And that's
so you're doing a meditation for
meditations and yoga practices that are very ancient. And so they shift something internally and externally, actually. And so I find, or, if I decide to do like a healing with somebody or with a healer, sometimes when it's really profound and I let something big go, I can see a shift in my cycle.
Yeah, for sure. And even with the thing in the throat, whenever a fluid shifts, whenever anything shifts in your body, that the rest of the body also gets affected. So depending on where that shift happened. So there's a concept in Ayurveda called a kavaigunya. And it means a weak and defective space in the body. And it's essentially where the traumas get stored. Okay. So it's where the traumas get stored. And when the traumas are stored, we don't always have access to them. And that's because oftentimes we will have both memory and tissue and matter surround them right? Depending on what happened after that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it affects our awareness of a trauma. So when we go through something that is cleansing, that uncovers that, and that can be done through physical cleansing. I would imagine that bringing a bunch of prana into the body could, dislodge physical structures, and I mean, it's an increase of prana in the body can create its own host of issues actually as well when you have too much prana. But once that sort of weak and defective space, that kavai gunya, it's pretty, isn't it? Sort of makes you feel like the bad thing sounds really pretty. The kavai gunya, this really crappy thing that happened to me, is actually really beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And once you see it, and once it becomes exposed, it's very delicate, because if you think the body is essentially a collection of channels. Blood goes through the veins and the arteries. The reproductive tract is its own channel. The digestive tract is a channel. The marrow, the brain, the central nervous system, they're all little channels. The cerebrospinal fluid, the interstitial area, everything's these little channels. The sweat coming out of our pores, all that. When we have a protected area in our body, we've protected this kavai gunya, and it becomes uncovered. What's under it actually can unblock a channel, because that whatever was covering it up, it has moved. So the awareness, the energy, the prana, and also new fluids, new bloods, things like that can move through the area. So it's almost like if you were to move a river, you would unblock a dam. The awareness, the love, so many things can come back into it. But you also have to know when an area, when a kavai gunya becomes activated or exposed, it's really super vulnerable. And the reason it is because if it was blocked in the past, it's not been getting that area of the body where it's been stored, is not getting its nutrients. It's not, and because it's not getting the nutrients, because it was blocked for a very good reason, to protect, right? Then the tissue has to essentially be rejuvenated, and it doesn't happen in a day. It just happens through time. But you have to know that that's going on. You have to say, you know what, this is going to get better. It's exposed, it's super raw, and I can see it, but I know it's going to get better, because now this area is able to get the love that it needs. It's able to get the nutrients that it needs. It's no longer a blocked channel.
How long does that usually, is it, I mean, I guess it varies per body, or is it vary per trauma, or does it vary per area?
I think all of those things, because, cells of the body turn over at different rates, depending on the type of tissue. Blood and lymph and things like that will turn over in a matter of days. Muscle will take a little bit longer. The, fat, maybe not as much as the muscle, but, so the fat, then the muscle, then the marrow, then the reproductive tissues get nourished last. But in Ayurveda, the reproductive tissues are the fluids that carry the seeds. So like the fluids that carry the sperm and the egg. So the menstrual blood or the semen for the man. And I know you wanted to talk about man, so maybe we can men. So
before we do that, could I ask a quick question about the healing of the trauma? Because I'm writing my next book on it. So it's very interesting.
Totally. Yeah.
So with healing, I believe, it's an internal world, and then it's reflected of the external world, and it's all hologram, right? So anybody who's coming into our life is just helping us heal some other wound that we haven't, exposed. So as these internal process, these spaces begin to heal, do you feel like people or external environments will come in after the fact or before the fact to help that space fill?
Oh, absolutely.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And could you give an example for people to understand what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I think I can talk about it more in an energetic level,
Okay.
than a physical level. But I can tell you that the most mm, effective changes that have happened in my life have happened when I've really had a big emotional blow up about something. I have this story. Before I became an Ayurvedic practitioner, I worked in a corporate job and I was the head of product development for a health insurance company. I don't know if I told you that.
Mm-mm.
And I had this meeting with my CEO and the whole executive team. And I was kind of frustrated because I was leading this project and they weren't putting resources on it. I had some really bad emotions going on about the situation. I felt like, oh, they just keep going out and golfing and they're not meeting with me enough. And I felt like I had a leadership team that was really checked out and not putting the resources where we needed them to be to do this project well. And I went into the meeting saying I was going to address that. And during that meeting, my CEO got very upset with me and started to basically say that I needed to be fired. And my boss was a woman. There were 3 women in the room, and then all the rest were men. And my boss was a woman, her boss was a woman, because we were all up the sort of marketing chain, which tends to be more female in the higher levels of corporations. So my boss started crying, and I was like, oh my God. And I started crying because my boss started crying. And it totally shifted the energy in the room. And all of a sudden, all the other executives, it was the entire executive team of the company, they all started jumping in and going, well, maybe Heather's right. And everybody started reacting with their own way of smoothing over the situation because it was so tense and so uncomfortable. And no one wanted to sit there and like watch all these people cry because it's painful. I mean, you have a baby. If you hear a baby cry, it physically pains you. And in fact, the military uses baby cries to distract in operations. Right. So, okay, so crying in and of itself is like this really, I think, a huge power.
Yeah. That a lot of people don't know how to use it.
Yeah, not like we should be walking around going like, oh my God, like making stuff up. But when you need to cry, you've got to let it happen, because I will tell you what happened at the end of that meeting because of everybody's emotional reactions to my emotional or my boss's initial, or maybe it was my initial emotional reaction. It was like the most productive meeting I had ever had. The resources were given. We completed the project a year later. It was amazing. So that's a business example, I would say. Or I used to teach yoga. Here's another example. I used to teach yoga, and I used to teach at this yoga studio that didn't get any students. And all my classes were just small. And I had one class that had one woman in it, and I gave her a private yoga class, and I was like, I can't teach her anymore. There's no students coming in here. It's killing me. And I got so sad, and I felt like crap about myself. And I walked up the street, and I, with my low self-esteem, walked into the yoga studio that was in my neighborhood. And I was like crying when I walked in, and they were all sitting in the front of the office having a meeting, all the owners. And they looked at me, and somehow they knew who I was. They were like, oh my God, hi, what are you doing here? And then they were like, oh, are you looking for a teaching job? And I was literally, I mean, it just happened. I left my class. I walked, a mile from the studio to my house to my neighborhood. And then I started crying, as I'm walking, and I'm tearing up, and everybody felt that. And immediately, I got this way more interesting, what I wanted, which was, more bodies to.
Well, it's really cool because it's sort of like you had moments of where you felt you lacked worthiness. And in that, you acknowledged it, and then you released it, and then you received.
Yes.
And I think that on so many levels, that's what's happening to so many women, is like aware, like that level of worthiness for like receiving on like so many levels. I know that's what I think that was the cycle transfer that I went through. And then the need to speak up for that. this is what I need you to do, and this is how it is. And if you cannot, give that to me, then something else will come in. It's very neat.
It's true. It will. And for me, I process things in poetry. Before I wrote my book, I actually wrote a book of poetry, which I haven't published, but that essentially is what informed my book later.
Yeah.
And, I have a way of understanding what's going on inside me through writing poetry. And I would write about, holes, like exactly what you're saying, holes being filled. Or, I think everybody gets a very intuitive sense of that, but we don't have a word in our language that defines that. We don't have a tangible way of understanding it. I think we understand it energetically though. And I think that the Kavaigunya maybe is the closest thing that I've found to that physical manifestation.
Yeah. And it's interesting you said you wrote poetry, but I did this prayer called the Japji for years. And the Japji is a Sikh prayer. It takes about 34 minutes. I got down to 9, and I did it every day for years and years. And then I did these stairs in India, which changed my life to liberate my family. And then I find out later that the Japji is often used for people that are, cultivating the sound current or cultivating a path to their words, or I don't know if but it made my brain think differently. It made the words jumble in a way that I could actually like put something on paper that was a different way of saying it. And so sometimes these prayers or these different ways of looking at words is just unjumbling the programming, I think, in our brains so that we can begin to articulate a healing process that's more profound into human words.
It's like transcendence.
Yeah.
And transcendence is maybe nothing more than sort of jumping off of a track you've been stuck in.
Right. And that's but the awakening part of, what I talk about a lot with mystical motherhood is like, it's not logical, and it's not the healing process and the awakening process. None of it is logical. It's always just like, it's like the bird flying past the window that makes the sign that that's over. Like the other day, a relationship was ending, and my sign for a relationship ending is always a dead bird. I came up with it myself. Well, actually, it was a flying bird. Then when
of the traditional parenting role right now, and that won't be like that forever. He's going to start working a lot, and then I'll shift back into that more kind of traditional mommy role or whatever. But that's the way we've made it work, where we just kind of are fluid. It's not easy though, because I think we're all used to the ways that it happened in our families. So I think understanding the specific type of stress that's happening is first most important, because stress comes in many forms. So I would look at it, what is the type of imbalance that is going on? So for some women, they're going to feel things are moving too fast. There's a dispersion of energy. They're going in too many directions. And we're all
the pressure. I said